Good morning. It's good to be here this morning. Awakening the quality of life. You know, we probably all take time every once in a while to discern what our quality of life is, or judging other people's quality of life. Is it poor, okay, or good? And often our quality of life is based on our parents' quality of life, because we learned from them how to be in life. And then what was our family history as we were growing up? As a small child, as a teenager, as an adult? I'm sure the quality of our life shifted. I know it did for me. But then we think, what was the quality of life for our grandparents? And my, haven't we come a long, long way? Typically, I think parents want their children to have a better quality of life than they had growing up. And Carl Jung wisely noted, nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parents. The goals never achieved, wanting the children to have a better life or to achieve what they might not have been able to do. Well, personally, as a child, I thought my life was very normal. We lived in a neighborhood called the Lane Addition in Springfield, Ohio, and it was a whole addition of 800 square foot houses, 3-bedroom houses and 800 square feet. And it was middle class America after World War II. Lots of children, lots of friends, lots of young families. And when I was 10, my father died. And my mother's worst fear was losing that house. She went to work at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, so she could earn enough money just to be able to stay in that house. And my brother still lives there today, so it's like a family heirloom. She never let us think that we were poor. She strived so hard to make us feel equal with all the other people in the Lane Addition. So we never had a sense that there was anything less than. But it was many years later that I looked back and I could see how difficult that was. It was extremely challenging, because I looked back and I noticed, oh, my friends used to all go on vacation with their families, or they would go camping, or they would go on picnics, or they would go to restaurants, and we never did. It was just too expensive. Plus, my mom had to work. But I never thought about it, because I didn't miss what I didn't know about. I didn't know what camping was. I didn't know what going on a vacation was. Never entered my mind how you would define that. So I didn't know what I didn't miss. During my teenage years, I was blessed to come upon a book, The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale. I'm sure many of you have read that. When I found that book, I inhaled it. I read it and read it and read it and read it. It woke me up to the possibilities in life, that there were infinite possibilities, this whole world out there that I think of myself as a teenager as kind of a space cadet, going to very strict Catholic schools, wearing uniforms. I had no fashion sense. I didn't think for myself until I read this book. And it talked about the power of intention. That was brand new to me. My mother insisted that I take secretarial courses in high school so that I would always be able to have a job, just like her. And it's always worked out well for me. No intention of ever going to college. But when I was getting upon graduation, I started using the power of positive thinking and decided I wanted a secretarial job. And 2 days before graduation, I got one at an insurance company. And in those days, the starting wage was 90 cents an hour. Now, you probably remember that. Yeah, that was big money back then for a kid out of high school. So when I was 19, we got married, moved to Whidbey Island. My husband was in the Navy, and I decided I'm going to work for the Navy Exchange. And I got a job there, and it paid $1 an hour. I was thrilled. I'm moving up the ladder of success. And I was determined to do even better. So when we got out of the Navy and went home to Ohio, why, I don't know why. The West Coast was so beautiful. But I got another job, and I was making $1.10 an hour. I mean, I was on a climb. It was so cool. And so when I look back today, I see everywhere I set an intention, it would always happen. Something would always happen. And it was like I was resetting my idea of a quality of life. You could live this way at this amount of income, and you can live this way at this amount, and set your intention. And so my life has been resetting my understanding of what my quality of life was. I was the first person in my extended family to go to college. That was a big deal. I took a job with corporate America, and all my friends said, "Why in the world would you do that? That's an evil way to work." And yet I was highly successful in corporate America. And Kickstart, a few years later here at this center, I met my husband, who's my soulmate. That really upped the quality of life. And then I became a Science of Mind minister. Now, is that the crowning achievement of my life? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's given me a quality of life I never, ever expected. So I thank not only my mother, but Norman Vincent Peale for opening my eyes that there's a whole world of possibilities out there. So yesterday I was Googling quality of life, and I found that the three most prominent levels of intelligence that contribute to our quality of life are rational, emotional, and spiritual. In the early 1900s, it was accepted that a person who had rational intelligence would be very successful in life. Rational intelligence was someone who was a deep thinker. But the 1990s, Kickstart ahead a few decades, it shifted, and the accepted theory was that a person with high emotional intelligence would have a greater ability to succeed in life because they would have a better ability to manage their emotions. Makes sense to me. In 1993, Martha Nussbaum's book, The Quality of Life, was published, and she came up with standard indicators of what a good quality of life was, which included wealth and employment, but also the physical environment, our physical body, our mental health, education, recreation, what we did with our leisure time. And now we're in the 21st century, and the debate on the quality of life is shifting again. It's changing. And I found this wonderful article. I made 10 copies, and they're at the board desk, so the first 10 people can get this article if you're interested, because it says the impact of spiritual intelligence on the quality of life. We've come a long way from just being able to solve problems to containing our emotions, to have a spiritual background in our life that contributes heavily to it. The researcher's name was Mr. Singh, S-I-N-G-H, and through his studies, he found that spiritual intelligence, which he calls SQ, the spiritual quotient, so I'll say SQ at times. Spiritual intelligence is the ultimate intelligence necessary for the functioning in the world because it allows people to be creative, to change the rules, to alter situations, and to discriminate. He found that having a high SQ enables us to differentiate between right and not so right. You know, when you have that feeling like, this just doesn't feel right, to be able to differentiate that. And how do you do that? By listening to our inner voice. Now, this is new information for most of America. Your spiritual intelligence by listening to your inner voice. And they found in their work that most people have underdeveloped that part of their nature. And they miss out on a really rich quality of life. So I'm glad you're here. So he and his team put together a research project on 303 government executives to examine the impact of spiritual intelligence on their quality of life. I hope I have your attention on that. Government executives. What if all people in the government had a high spiritual intelligence? What would be the world we would be living in then? It would be quite different. It would be quite amazing, actually. And it's possible because spiritual intelligence is learned. Again, rational intelligence is about thinking logically, which is an innate quality. We all have that in one way, shape, or form. We can all have problem-solving skills to different levels. Emotional intelligence is about feelings, the capacity to recognize our own feelings, but also the capacity to recognize the feelings in other people. And we can manage our emotions in relationships. So that's a high EI, emotional intelligence. And it can be tested. It's something you can test on people. And you can be trained to improve your emotional intelligence. I think we do that a lot in our classes here. But if all our energy is tied up on the outer, recognizing what other people are doing, how they're acting, how we're acting, there's not much area left to pay attention to the next level, which is spiritual intelligence, which is listening to the voice within. So when we talk about SQ, the spiritual quotient, some definitions are important. Webster defines spirit as the animating principle which gives life to our body, to all bodies that are alive. Spirit is the breath of life. Spirituality has been defined as our need to connect to something larger than ourselves, something we consider divine or otherworldly. As a teenager, I started to question my Catholic beliefs. So I bought a lot of books about other teachings, and I left them laying around the house because I know it did bother my mother a lot, but I wanted to be clear with her. I just can't buy all this anymore. And so I kept wanting to learn more about this thing called God. And that's when I started my spiritual journey, although I didn't realize it at the time. And it didn't bear fruit until I found this teaching, a couple of decades later, this teaching. Because spiritual intelligence is about being. My greatest spiritual teacher was Dr. James Golden. He was one of the first ministers here at this center and was here 27 years. Initially, I found his way of adding Eastern teachings to the science of mind a little uncomfortable. It was a bit jarring. Chanting? Did Ernest Holmes chant? You know, it was just questioning all this. And it wasn't until he led a group of us on a 3-hour meditation. And just as it was winding up, I felt purple clouds pouring out of the top of my head. It was just one of those weird things that I could just feel this purple just coming out of the top of my head. So I knew there was something about this Eastern stuff that had power. And I've enjoyed the relationship of Eastern and science of mind immensely. Dr. James had the ability to behave with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace regardless of what was happening around him. And I didn't know then, but that's the definition of spiritual intelligence. The ability to behave with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace regardless of the situation. It's thought to be the most fundamental of all intelligences because it's a source of guidance and it links the rational and the emotional intelligence. I look back and I realize that from this study that I have copies out there, spiritual intelligence was a critical part of our practitioner and ministerial training. The ability to behave with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace regardless of the situation. So in this study, Professor Zig found that a government executive with a high spiritual quotient, a high spiritual intelligence, responds more appropriately to situations. But they also analyze how the situation came to be and how they can improve a situation. That's real spiritual intelligence, not emotional intelligence. It's spiritual intelligence. So a person with a high spiritual quotient is comfortable operating outside their boundaries. They have a moral sense, an inherent moral sense, and the ability to look at rigid rules and see, is this really necessary? But they have an equal ability to have compassion and understanding with others. Yesterday I was pondering who have I met in my career in the timber and pulp and paper industry, working with government officials, who have I met that I would say had a high spiritual quotient? And I remember years ago, during the spotted owl controversy, I was working for Wheelabrator and very involved in that with the timber industry. And Nadine Bailey, who you may know her name from the timber industry days, and we met with the government executive who I think had a very high spiritual quotient. Nadine and I were chosen by the Northern California timber industry to make their case to this person, who was Vice President Dan Quayle. He came to Anderson, and it was during the spotted owl controversy, and we put together this huge program for him, and it was Nadine and I giving that explanation to him. Afterwards, he invited Nadine and I to come to Washington, D.C. and meet with his staff and give them our spiel, our program, which we did, and it was really exciting. They listened, they asked lots of questions. We felt really heard, although nothing ever changed, but at least we felt heard, and it was a good experience. But I thought that came to mind of all the people I've met over my many years in the industry. That's the one that came to me the most. Studies show that the rational and emotional intelligence are in different hemispheres of our brain, but spiritual intelligence is a whole brain activity. It requires our conscious intention to activate it. Aha. It's the same energy behind the power up process in the groups of 8. Conscious intention. And we set a clear intention, we focus on it, we power up, we energize it, we feel it. That's where the power comes from. But it's also interesting that there's a mirror effect in the groups of 8. If you set an intention and power up the energy for some one person in the group, all of a sudden, for instance, if they want more inner peace, all of a sudden you have more inner peace. That's the great thing about the process. Some of you have taken classes on Dr. Joe Dispenza's book. One of his books is Becoming Supernatural: How Common People Are Doing the Uncommon. How do they do that? Because all possibilities exist in the quantum field. We can turn ideas into reality. We can turn ideas into the three-dimensional world of matter. But it requires 2 things. Guess what? Clear intention and elevated emotion. To feel you have it before you have it. Intention is an electrical charge, while elevated emotion is a magnetic charge. So you've got electrical charge and magnetic charge. The magnetic charge can be emotions like love, gratitude, inspiration, joy. So you have the intention with the emotion. Actually, it's the 3rd step of spiritual mind treatment. We find out what you want in your life. The practitioner states it clearly of the intention. The practitioner states it with emotion. The practitioner knows it so now. And I'll tell you, spiritual mind treatment has saved my bacon many times. I was telling Paul, sometimes he doesn't know all these stories that I have from when I worked in the industry. And I was the fuel manager at Wheelabrator in Anderson. And from the day that plant started, I was there, and it uses 100 semi-truckloads a day of wood waste, 7 days a week. 100. And it was up to me to find it, from sawmills, from orchards, from various places, sometime bidding the price up to take it away from somebody else. It's kind of a tough industry. But for the first 10 years, it was all going smooth, and then all of a sudden, the sawmill, the lumber market went bad, and the sawmill started decreasing production. All of a sudden, all of the wood-fired power plants in Northern California were running short. My treatment was, there's always enough. There's always enough, just think outside the box. So finally, I got together the managers of 7 other biomass plants, wood-fired power plants, and I said, hey, let's bring some down from Canada. They've got plenty up there. Because I used to work in Puget Sound. And they went, really? I said, oh, sure. I'll just call up there and find some, and we'll have it hauled down and unloaded at the Port of Richmond near Berkeley. And that's what we did. An ocean-going barge that carried 480 truckloads of wood. Huge. It was bigger than this building. And I have a picture of it, and I was showing Paul that. Oh my gosh, were we smiling, all of us standing by that huge barge of all that wood waste. But we were able to do it, and actually all the 7 biomass plants that received some of that did not have to curtail because they had enough wood. So going back to this study about government executives, the results show that the older executives get, their SQ, their spiritual quotient, increases. Because as we get older, we feel that nudge of spirit. You know, when we're young, we're raising kids, trying to build a career, and you get a little older and you find yourself coming to a place like this. And with that, that feeling that spirit's with you, connecting with you, helps in so many areas where there's problems in government. They can see the problem differently. They can see how it could be. They can see the power of intention in making it shift. They have a broader perspective, a bigger understanding. Wouldn't it be wonderful if all government executives had that high spiritual quotient? And they can, because it's trainable. It's trainable. So you can improve your spiritual quotient. You don't have to be an executive to do it. And we have the tools right here. Meditation, even chanting from Dr. James, daily prayer, spiritual classes, a lot of spiritual classes that do that. They move us forward on this upward spiral of our soul's evolution. Just recently, Twyla Cooley, you probably all recognize Twyla when she's here, she took my class, It's All God. And when the class was over, she said, I used to say that, but now I realize it. She was just amazed how much she learned that it's all God. So in conclusion, I want to leave you with the words of the research scholar, Mr. Zing. Human life is the greatest gift that infinite intelligence bestows on us. We ought to respect and love it and make the most of it. We're spiritual beings going through a human experience, and I feel obliged to develop my SQ to live the highest quality of life that I can. And from Reverend Sue and I, this center is here to inspire and empower you to live spiritually fulfilling lives. We invite you to fully participate in that vision for yourself, not for anyone else. You can increase your spiritual intelligence and live the highest quality of life you can, or you deserve, or you want. You can join in, you can participate, and as the peace song says, let it begin today. Thank you.